Hello, and welcome to today's very exciting webinar, Veeam plus FBI, Experience and Expertise to Beat Ransomware. Today's webinar is sponsored by Veeam and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's timely content from a pair of really great speakers, there are a few things that you should know about this webinar. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we're going to have a dedicated and I expect lively Q&A session at the end of the presentation, where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources, including a PDF on ransomware capabilities from Veeam. Also, links to our Guerrilla Guide book club, where you can access Actual Tech Media books about tech by techies. And also a link to the ATM Event Center, where you can find out about all of our great events that we put on. So I encourage you to access those resources now, share them with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar, we're going to be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky attendee on the live event. Of course, you must be in attendance during the event to qualify for the prize, and you can see the prize terms and conditions at the bottom of the handout section. So stick around for that. And finally, one of the best benefits of an event like this is an opportunity to ask a question of our expert speakers. So we have an award. If you ask the best question, you'll win a $50 Amazon gift card. That's only one of the awards we have for great questions today. And one of our speakers here in a minute is going to tell you about another one. So keep your eye out for that. But let me tell you who's going to be on today. We've got Rick Vanover, who's Senior Director of Product Strategy at Veeam. Great presenter, great technical expert, always brings it. And we have Scott Augenbaum, who's a retired FBI agent, and together they're going to be providing great insights on the tech side of ransomware, on the criminal actor side of ransomware, and it's going to be a fantastic discussion. I'm really looking forward to it. So let's get into it here. And with that, let me bring on Rick and Scott. Gentlemen, welcome.
Cheers.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone.
Really glad to have you both here. I'm going to step back and Rick, let you take it away.
Well, cheers. Yeah, so Scott and I are going to jump into it. We got a lot to cover, but before we get into it, I want to get a mindset. Your odds, the math is not in your favor today. And do you really like that, right? The bad guys or the bad actors only have to be right once, and the good actors need to be right all the time. That's the mindset that Scott and I have to kind of prepare this dialogue. And we did, as Scott alluded to it, but we're also going to give away 5 copies of Scott's books to the best questions that we like, right? So you got to keep these questions coming. We're going to get into it. But let's like kind of set this up. Scott, tell me about how did you become an FBI agent? And then how did cybercrime become that specialization before we get into the today aspect of it?
Well, first of all, Rick and my friends at Veeam, thanks so much for bringing me out here. And especially to everybody who's on the webinar today. I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to make you a promise. This is not going to be a boring webinar, okay? Rick and I met last week. We were down in Orlando. We should have just had a microphone and did the event there because we had so much back and forth and great questions. And, if you can see the big smile on my face, Rick, it's because I'm retired from the FBI. And the number one question I get is, do I miss the FBI? And I go, no. Had an amazing 30-year career. If I had my life to do over again, I'd still join the FBI. I had so much fun. It was such a great experience. But today I do what I love to do, which is teaching people, sharing my experiences with one goal: to prevent you and your organization from being the next cybercrime victim. We're going to take you out of your comfort zone. But Rick, you asked me before, here I am. If you would have told me some 34 years ago today, I'd be retired from the FBI, wrote a book about cybercrime, been on major network news, I would have said, no way. I grew up in New York City, raised by a single parent, didn't do very well in high school, went to community college, didn't do very well in community college. But luckily, when you don't do well in community college, you can always get a job with the federal government as a file clerk. So I got a job making $5.50 an hour, surrounded by a lot of positive role models in my life at age 20 as a file clerk, went back to college at night, started working on an MBA in finance and technology. Rick, 1992, I'm working on an MBA at Fordham University in technology. And you want to know what the big issue was in 1992? The business units were having a hard time communicating with IT. Let me ask you, 30 years later, have we figured out that problem yet?
No, we just have more of it.
Absolutely. And an opportunity opens up to become an FBI agent in 1994. And I go to Quantico, Virginia. I'm in over my head. I'm at the FBI Academy, become an agent. 1995, get sent to Syracuse, New York, where I work every type of crime available. Being an FBI agent in 1995 was so easy. Bad people did bad things to good people. I worked with state and local cops. We put bad guys in jail. What a fun and exciting job. But then there was that moment that occurred in my life, and it was because I picked up an AOL floppy disk. Remember those? And I stuck it into a computer. And by default, I became the cyber guy in the office in 1998, and I couldn't get rid of it. And when I started my career, and I went to FBI, I was at FBI headquarters from 2003 to 2006, working on the FBI Cyber Division National Strategy, because Rick and I are going to talk about the evolution of the threat. I mean, FBI, I've been dealing with this since 2003 full time. Went to Nashville for 11 years until I retired. And during my time in Nashville, I had the opportunity to interact with over 1,000 cybercrime victims. These aren't stories I read in books. And this is what we're going to really kind of dive into today is, listen, the evolution of the threat. And it's not as hopeless as you feel, because one of the things I discovered is a majority of the cybercrime victimizations that I dealt with could have been prevented. And some of the things we're going to talk about today are things that I've been talking about for decades. And Rick, I am so excited to be here with you guys today.
Yeah, we got a good question, Scott, that just came in from Ned, and I'll take Ned's question. He's the first of my winners, right? Because we got 3 different types of winners. This Amazon gift card, the big one that Scott B mentioned. We have the $50 for best question, but then there's the one that'll get you a free book. We're going to follow up with you, Ned. So Scott, I'm going to direct this question to you. Based on your professional experience, in that journey took you up to cyber crimes, the ransomware. Before we called it ransomware, anything digital that was bad. Ned's question is, what are the main targets according to the FBI? And I'm going to change that kind of now and later, right? Take me through the timeline. What are those targets, right? What are people going after?
Well, Ned, great question. Let me kind of phrase it what I call the 4 truths about cybersecurity, because during my career, I learned a lot of commonalities. There were patterns that I developed in all of my victimizations. And I didn't discover this until I retired, but the number one, and these are the 4 truths, and we're going to talk about these. And Ned, the first truth, none of my victims ever expected to be a victim because they didn't think they fit a threat profile. And I'm here to tell you there's no such thing as a threat profile. Okay? The cyber criminals do not care who you are. They do not care the size of your organization. You will still be targeted. It broke my heart when I would have to deal with small businesses, nonprofit organizations. Nashville, the Silicon Valley of healthcare. We have about 550 healthcare organizations. Part of my role with the FBI, besides dealing with responding to incidents, was going out and educating the community. And I would sit down with organizations And I would say, are you concerned about being a target? And they'd say no. And I go, well, why not? We're a small company. As I go through this, Rick, what's your definition? What's a small company to you?
Well, I would change the scope, Scott. I would say the target is really anybody who potentially would pay. I mean, I would flip it around because that's what
Oh,
the
yeah.
threat actors are looking at. They're looking at that outcome. And how do you get to not to pay? That's the preparation that, in the last couple minutes here, I'm gonna contract the Veeam story into practical things you can do now. But I look at that's what they're looking at. Who's going to pay? Not necessarily who has money, but who needs to pay, that type of thing.
But with Rick, and here I am, I'm going out, I'm dealing with organizations. They tell me I am not concerned. I'm a small company. I had a $300 million company say, look, I don't fit the threat profile. And I'm like, okay. So I went out, I talked to companies on the NASDAQ. They go, we're not concerned. We're not on the New York Stock Exchange. Good point. So I go talk to the publicly traded companies on the New York Stock Exchange in my area of responsibility with the FBI. And the best response is I'm a $5.8 billion company. Why would anyone want to target me? I just read some data breach response report that said they're targeting 10 to $15 billion and above companies. And this is my empathy nerve. I wanted to go over and say, where are you getting your information from? People Magazine. These cyber criminals do not care who you are. They will target your information. They will target you. They will go after your stuff. They will target you for ransomware. And now we're going to focus a lot on ransomware, but a lot of these things you can take and apply on any type of cyber crime incident that occurs. So Ned, getting back to that, I don't care who you are. I mean, people say, well, we got to look at the risk. We got to look, do we fit the parameters? It doesn't matter. It does not exist because today a majority of the information is sitting there. It is sitting in platforms that are unprotected, and the cyber criminals are just taking it for opportunity. So realize they want your intellectual property. They want your healthcare information. They want your PII. They even want to get access to your Salesforce account. So that's the big thing here. I don't care if you're a mom and pop or if you are a Fortune 100 company, you still fit the same profile.
Yeah, I would say there is no profile target. It's really that broad now, and great perspective there, Scott. I'm going to pick up Chris's question here. Chris had said, in this one, I'll start with the answer because I've got a Veeam inspired answer, but Chris, Scott, I'd love to hear your angle as well. Chris's question is, what's the best way to address ransomware and cyber threats that are timed to or set to time bomb or dwell, aka remain dormant for a number of time? Chris gives a number of 35. So Chris, my first answer is there's a technique that Veeam has called secure restore, which is a way that when you recover data, that you will actually prevent a threat from being reintroduced by scanning against known threats. So that is a very good safeguard, a lot of additional handling that can be placed into the mix. The other angle I would drop in there, Chris, is like sometimes you might just have to extract data, right? You don't go back to the way you were, you go back to something new that you can trust. And having some portability, having some flexibility, and then also some confidence that you're not reintroducing the threat. This is something that Veeam has for the mix. But, it goes back into how do you deal with a problem when it's happening. And Scott, anything you can offer on, how do we get out of a problem without reintroducing the problem? Any perspective there?
Well, that's a great one. Now I want to flip this on its head, okay? Because I don't know if it's inappropriate. Can I win the $300 gift card?
No.
I mean, is that inappropriate
Not
for me
at
to
all.
ask that question?
No.
Okay. So let's take this and let's see if we can blow up the question and answer thing, because this really plays into it. Because the question I get all the time is, what would have to happen for you to contact law enforcement, to contact the FBI, and bring them into your life Because that's one of the number one questions I get. And I'd love to hear from the audience over here. And I'm not going to look down at the chat. So if you can tell that, because that's something I get asked all the time. And this really kind of plays into the whole thing with the dwell time and how long the actors are sitting on our situation. So Rick, I want to pick your brain. What do you think? What would you tell clients? When do you bring, the FBI in? And I am a lot of fun to bring into your organization.
Well, there's
I mean,
actually
now I am now that
there's a big debate when I talk to end users and organizations who are, thinking about how to prepare to deal with incident response or in the middle of an incident. Two observations that I have in the market, Scott. Number one, I see public sector organizations, cities, governments, state, local organizations, and to an extent, sometimes schools, having kind of defined incident response plans. They're not necessarily built for ransomware, but they're built for incidents. And then you walk into this scenario, okay, we have an incident. A cybersecurity ransomware thing is an incident. So if you don't have an incident response plan, like the public sector, companies usually are a little weak there. That's my observation. The second thing is there's a really big question of reporting. Do we report this to the FBI? Do we, call the local sheriff? They might not do much help. Do we tell our boss? Scott, I've had scenarios where I've talked to organizations that had isolated non-exfiltration ransomware scenario. They just restored and carried on their business. They didn't tell anybody. I don't know. That's a different problem, up for debate another day. But there's one very important thing that comes out of that, Scott, and that is if an organization has a ransomware incident and reports it, it's very likely that the law enforcement equivalent in the cyber and digital world of yellow police tape could be wrapped around your data center for weeks trying to figure out what in the heck actually happened. And you might even have some experience in that. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, how long do we have? About 5 hours today? Because we can go on.
I've got a lounge chair right behind me.
But no, and listen, so let's get back to the original thing here, because that's a whole great thing. That's a myth. Okay, the Bureau's not coming in with tape and securing your data and all that stuff. The big question I get all the time is, Scott, when do we call the FBI? What defines an incident? And that's the wrong question to ask. Because when I've had data breaches, and today's data breach usually comes in with a ransomware attack, because here's the news for you. If you go over and they put ransomware on your information, most likely they stole your information too.
Fair.
I've seen that firsthand. I work with a lot of the large IR companies today. But here's the question I want to throw out here, and this is how we're going to stress test all of your intrusion response plans. When there are data breaches during my career with the FBI, nobody called me. I called organizations and I told them that their information was stolen. So here's the tabletop data breach. I come into your organization, I have your data, I throw it on the table and I go, here's your information. You have an incident. What do you do? And let me tell you, I've had to break the bad news to a lot of very large organizations, and most intrusion response plans do not tell you what to do when the big bad federal government or a Mr. Nice Guy like myself comes in. That's why we have to focus so much on the prevention aspect of this. And when I was in the FBI in 2015, I was providing ransomware guidance that the FBI put out 7 years ago today. Not today, 7 years ago, we were telling organizations what to do. And these were things that come into the hygiene that people need to think about, thinking about your backups. But then again, also thinking about what's on your network, because the bad guys are getting in, they're exfiltrating information, they're impacting you with ransomware, and unfortunately, companies don't know what to do when that comes into the situation. And Rick, what do you tell your clients? Hey, listen, your client calls you up and says, another question I get, hey, do we pay the ransom or do we not pay the ransom? Can you poll the audience? Can you see what the responses are? What are most people saying out there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I have an answer, but yeah, drop it in. Do you pay
I'd
it or
love
not?
to hear from the audience and to see what.
Scott, I think there were 3 people that said that confirmed your bit about that call from the FBI, that just like you told it. So great interaction here.
And it's
Good.
a
I like
horrible
the
deal. Rick,
answers.
it's a,
Yeah.
let me tell you, for everyone here who hasn't been through it, we're here to make sure, and that's why Veeam brought me in, to make sure that give you some strategies to prevent that
Right.
from happening. It is a horrible experience. If you have never been through a breach, and a breach where a third party tells you it's the worst experience in the world. But do we pay or do we not pay? That's the big
Never.
question. That's the
Never.
question I get all the time.
But
Really?
well,
You really think never pay?
I say never pay for 2
Oh,
reasons. Well, let me give you a reason you probably never thought of, Scott. Number 1, if the threat actors have touched my data once, and if I pay them money to touch it again 2 times to make it better, do I really trust that data afterward? No, I don't. And I have a mindset, Scott, that if a threat gets into my environment, something like ransomware, the only acceptable outcome is to restore data. Now that predicates that we have prepared accordingly. Okay, now that's something Veeam can help you all with. And Scott, you dropped a really good question about, do the panelists agree that we should focus our attention on identity-focused security, people, user credentials, behavior, data loss prevention, and security and incident management tools? Yes to all of that. But if all of that fails, which again, the numbers are in your odds or the odds are not in your favor, that it is possible that all of those mechanisms would fail. In fact, I'd go so far to say is human training, personnel training is one of the most effective defenses here. If all of those fail, the only outcome is to recover data, right? Or conscious loss of data, or pay the ransom, but I'm not doing that. So you don't like my no, don't pay, Scott. Why so?
well, listen, and this is what's great, because if Rick and I agreed with everything, this would kind of be boring. But this is what's kind of interesting about it, because I sat here with the FBI and like a robot, I would go, we do not pay. There's great reasons that we shouldn't pay. I've seen companies pay the data on a Monday, not figure out what vulnerability was there, and then got targeted by another ransomware organization on Wednesday. And they were all amazed. They're like, hey, we paid. We did. How did this happen? I've seen situations that occur where all of a sudden you pay and it's dead silence. Now, here's what the scenario that I'm seeing today, because the threat of ransomware, it hasn't really morphed. It's the same thing. But now what's happening is the bad guys are stealing your information. It's number 1. Now they are encrypting your backups because people aren't having the right backup plan. So I have dealt with plenty of situations where I have seen organizations, big law firms, publicly traded companies. Now, Rick, let me ask you the $1 million question. Let's say your backup fails, okay? The bad guy has stolen your stuff. How long can your organization survive without access to your stuff?
Well, I've spent the last 2 years, Scott, 3, maybe more than that. I don't know, long time, trying to get out to the market practical advice, and we'll end on that here towards the end of the session, of what I see. And a couple of comments. The other Ned dropped in something. You're right about some of these things, taking some time and things like that. I've spent my side hustle, my non-product focus, my market focus is really to educate the market about these threats, Scott. And what I'm seeing is that my recommendation today is this. It's not quite baseball season yet, but this analogy works. I love to drop in the notion of double play immutability, 2 independent, discrete copies of backup data that is immutable. And it's easier than ever to do. And so what I mean by this, Scott, is that if I have 2 different copies of my backup data that are immutable, which means it can't be altered, and the way I do that with Veeam, if I just met someone on this webinar and was talking about their environment, I would recommend putting Veeam backups on the hardened Linux repository, which you can have at no additional cost, and then to an object storage resource with object lock It can be as easy as the public AWS S3 or some other providers like it. And you can right away have two different copies of your backup data that are what I made a word, I made it up, Scott. Ultra resilient means that they're inherently resilient to the threat of active deletion. And then by having one offsite in the cloud, you're prepared against fire, flood, and blood. We got to still prepare for those types of disasters too. And the thought is, by the math, two independent copies that are ultra resilient by immutability drive very high confidence in data recovery, because I don't want to be in that, oh, the one way out of this problem fails. That's not a scenario I want to be in.
Well, as I like to use some analogies too, but a little simpler than yours, not as technical, as the great poet Mike Tyson said, a plan is only as good until you get punched in the mouth. And when I'm dealing with publicly traded organizations, that what's the best New York way to say, are sitting here and they're having the debates. And I'm telling you, I look behind the scenes. I'm still talking with my FBI guys on the same time. And here's the great thing. I talk to my buddies with the FBI because everyone goes, Scott, since you're retired, how do you get in touch with Intel? I go out, I have a couple of beers with my buddies. I go, hey guys, anything new in the past 4 years? They go, nope, not a thing. Just a lot more ransomware and a lot more business email compromise. Okay? And now here's my fear, Rick. The Nigerians who are killing us right now in the business email compromise, once they figure out how to take ransomware, build it to scale, and start impacting the masses, that's when it's game over. And that's why we have to start thinking. Companies aren't taking the time. And here's my big thing, because I want to go through these four. You remember we talked about the 4 truths of cybersecurity? The first one is nobody ever expects to be a victim. The second truth to cybersecurity, and I want everyone here to get this straight, when the bad guys encrypt your stuff or steal your stuff, or even think about this, hurt your elderly parents or your kids, law enforcement's not coming with a magic wand and fixing your problem. I hate to say that. And the third truth to cybersecurity is the chances of law enforcement putting a majority of these bad guys in jail is really challenging. There was a major arrest a couple of weeks ago in Poland on a major ransomware affiliate. Hey, Rick, do you think we're any safer today when we were 3 weeks ago?
No, and one of the comments in was mentioning that incident, and there was another thing. It might have been in late 2020 or 2019, but in Germany there was a ransomware incident tied to loss of human life at a hospital. Right, so some of these woes cannot be undone. Right, so we're in a world of the threatscape getting out of control, and you're right. We can't undo what happened, but when it comes to the consequential loss, but we can prepare to, somebody said, prepare to get punched in the face. I like that. And so, having these backup topics in place now, incident response now is a good idea. Joey WS drops in something. He says, with worm technologies, write once, read many. Worm technologies existed for over 25 years. Why are so few people using it? Joey, you win a book. The reality is, I don't know. There's more options than ever. And I would somewhat equate, Joey, some of these immutability options in the hyperscale public cloud, some of the options you can get on robust storage systems, robust snapshots, worm media on tape, for example. Scott, I said tape, but on tape, it's been out for 75 years, but to this day, magnetic data tape is a marvel, a modern marvel of engineering. And worm media tape, when removed from the tape library, right there, that makes that copy of data immutable, offline, and air gapped all at once. That is a very resilient specimen that, when you think about some of these threats, fire, flood, and blood, and ransomware included, that's really awesome. So I'll flip it around. The one piece of advice when I talk to organizations who do not come out of ransomware well, the one consistent thing that I see is that they do not have a copy that is either offline or air gapped or immutable. because that is the type of media that will give you very high confidence in driving data recovery. And you're right, you can't always undo some of these things, but you can prepare for that punch in the face. Joey, you
But
hit one.
it goes back to the first thing. Goes back to the first thing on the 4 truths on cybersecurity. Nobody expects to be a victim. That's why they're not doing it. This would never happen to me. Why do I need to do this? And this is where kind of on the emotional side comes in. And this is one of the things that we talked about, especially down in Florida. We had this discussion. And, we think so much, and I like to throw this around, especially in the world of healthcare. A lot of healthcare clients on the phone today. Okay, we deal with confidentiality. Okay, they're going to steal our information. World's going to survive. Okay, our stuff's going to be locked down. Okay, but what about the integrity issue? And Rick, am I off base here by saying this? Think about this as a healthcare organization. How difficult would it be? What ends up happening if the scenario comes over? Because we don't talk about this on dealing with the integrity of information. Now, my financial services sector folks are like, all right, integrity. But what about in healthcare? What if you just are able to figure out and change everyone's blood type from an A to a B? Then you go back and you send that message to your people at this healthcare organization and just go like this. Hey, I'm Boris Badenough. I just want to let you know your stuff is not encrypted. I did not steal your stuff. I just changed about 100 patients' blood types. What do you do?
Or moved the decimal place the wrong way on everybody's bank account, right? I mean, these types of things, Scott, are absolutely scenarios that the threat actors are going to continue to manipulate and find new ways. I mean, exfiltration is one, double extortion, triple extortion, these other threat vectors, but integrity manipulations. I myself in my professional practice haven't, actually, I do have an example. I do have an example of one of those types of things happening, but it's a little bit different. I'll tell the people on the phone here. I spoke to an organization via our Veeam's tech support team because they have these professionals that help with ransomware scenarios. But the scenario, Scott, was a SQL Server database, standard enterprise database platform that everyone on this phone, if they're a practicing IT pro, they probably have in their environment. The scenario was the threat actor dropped in native SQL encryption on the data, right? So your data is not, it's the integrity is manipulated a different way. I've encrypted it with SQL and I'm selling you the key, right, to get back to your own data. So I have heard accounts of that. Luckily we were able to drive a SQL database recovery and remediate that threat. But it's like the integrity, the accuracy of the data, the stakeholders, and then the identities and all these other things. It's more than just some of these historical locker type incidents, because those of you who have dealt with an incident, and that's kind of a good time, Scott, kind of pivot to kind of our next, section here, is what do you need to do? What information do you need to do to deal with this threat today? And that is knowing that you have to prepare. You have to be able to get out of basically any type of problem that might happen. And we don't always know what these threats and these threat behaviors will be, but we know they're going to change. We know they're going to go after. Everybody's a victim. And more importantly, and we had a couple of chats here come up, Scott, I think nobody wants to get the call from the FBI, or they don't want to get a help desk ticket or a text message from their CEO saying, what is this? And it's a screenshot of some bizarre cryptic message on his or her desktop, right? How do we pivot this to actionable information for what we can do today? I mean, I mentioned having object, backups that are immutable. That's a great thing. If you're not doing it, do that. But from your experience, Scott, what do you want the market to know and to learn for their next step in their IT practice?
Sure. Well, everybody's looking for a magic bullet. Okay, it's that simple. Everybody is like sitting here looking for the 6-minute abs solution to, not the 7-minute abs, the 6-minute abs solution to fix your problem. And let me just tell you a couple of commonalities that I've seen. A majority of the victimizations that I dealt with were not following the core critical controls. First of all, most people did not have an accurate network diagram. They didn't know what was on their network. How do I know that? Because when I would have to bring the bad news to an organization and say, hey, there's traffic beaconing out of your network, encrypted, and it's going to a hostile command and control server used by a threat actor, and they would go, that's not on my network. You go, yes, it is. And they couldn't find the visibility, and they'd find it was a development box that was sitting on their network connected to everything. They did not have visibility into their network. Now, we all know patching is very, very hard, right? How do you patch if you don't know what's on your network? And then I would sit here with an organization. They go, hey, we really want to, what should we buy? And I'd say, hey, does everyone on, is everyone an admin user? And they'd go, yeah. And I'm like, okay, we're allowing executables to run. There's so many different things. I always refer to people, and that's why connect with me on LinkedIn. I have some documents I'd love to share with you. I don't have Bill, this 2015 guidance, it's nothing has really kind of changed except the lack of sophistication required to pull off a major incident today. First of all, most organizations do not realize that the main attack vector for the distribution of this malware is email. Okay. And then we start dealing with, and I can't tell you, and this is according to my buddies. I mean, all of my buddies who retired from the FBI, they're killing it. They're doing intrusion response. Because when you have a problem, you're going to pay, and you're going to pay a lot of money. And the people who are usually paying are and especially in the ransomware situations, are the ones that did not have a good backup strategy in place. Because at the end of the day, there is no gray area on ransomware. Either you're going to get impacted or you're not going to get impacted. And if you are going to get impacted because you haven't taken all the proper steps, the last thing in the world that's going to save you is your backup strategy. I've dealt with companies, Rick, where they've used some subpar backups, and you want to know what happens? They never tested it. They didn't restore it. And there's nothing worse than having the worst thing to not having a backup is having a backup that you can't access.
Yeah,
so
fair show.
What do you guys do that's different than everybody else?
Yeah, that's a good point. And a couple things. I mean, I want to highlight Robert, because you're going to get the gold star, Robert M, about how you roll with your Veeam backups. You're on the list for the book. Robert N, Joey WS, Scott M, Chris C, and Ned K are all going to be on my top 5 here for Scott's view. And, a lot of these comments that are coming in are really aligning to what you're saying, Scott. And I do a lot of research as well, from Coveware, from the Verizon Data Breach Incident Report, CrowdStrike Frontlines. Veeam does its own research on ransomware and top 3 modes of entry in order of popularity of sorts: email, remote access done wrong, and updates not being patched, right? So another thing, number 1 piece of advice, have immutable backups in place. Number 2, train users, have systems to protect the email, spam, Trojan horse, have remote access done right. Especially important nowadays, a lot more work from home, time to revisit that. Number 2, update. We're supposed to be doing that anyways, right? And so the thought is some of these things work together. Example, Trojan email or a spam email that brings something in may then work off of remote access not done well, may then work off of exploits being exploited. These things all work off of each other, right? So if you've ever got into any root cause, this type of stuff might make sense to you. Inside actors, whole nother topic. We'll talk about that another time. All right. Hey, I think we might even crack 300 on the questions. I apologize. There will be no way I can get through all 300 of these questions, but you guys have done a great deal. Cody, you ask about preventing ransomware, user training. That's a really good way, and what I think that is the mindset that organizations need to have today, and this is what we've taken here at Veeam really seriously, is to really take a mindset. Everything else you're doing, security, IT training, fish email systems, fish email training. If you need a free one, go to gofish.org. If you want one that you pay for, go to KnowBefore, right? And some of you may have used these different tools. The reality is all the security, do it all. Training, do it all. But if something fails, because remember, the numbers are not in your favor. If any of you administer email systems, how many, Robert, coming soon. I'm going to drop a roadmap on you. Boom, boom, boom. There you go. How many of you who have email systems that you administer and you look through all the junk and you can see the junk? You can see these test threats. They're out there. So if all of those fail, number one thing, I have taken it as our mindset here at Veeam is that secure backup is indeed your last line of defense, because all of the other mechanisms have failed. The numbers are not in your favor, but you can control that data as you want. Good shout there, Toby. The workforce, yeah, the whole users, everything's great except the users. You're right. So here at Veeam, we have a 3-point approach. Number one, have immutable backups. There's more immutable options than ever with Veeam. We're not going to get into all of that, but reach out to us, talk to our SE teams or sales team. You'd be surprised what you can do nowadays. We even have some 4 eyes recovery mechanisms with our service providers. Really, really good stuff. Number two, I think this is very important: detection, monitoring, and alerting. We don't want ransomware to be discovered by end users or the help desk or that text message or that phone call. Many of you on this call have been there. Veeam has technologies today to shorten that time from when a threat is introduced and then the behavior is noticed. Really take another look at it. It's awesome. And then number three, the testing and verification for rapid, reliable recovery to not reintroduce these threats. That's the expectation today. And we get this done today with our products: Veeam Backup and Replication, Veeam One for monitoring, the Orchestrator, orchestrated disaster recovery, and believe it or not, over in Kubernetes world, got my Caston shirt on right now, we have ransomware ready immutable backups over in the Kubernetes ecosystem. Right? So if you haven't looked at Veeam, it's really a good time to take another look. Our protection is really broken down into 6 modules here. Now, I told the gentleman who made this, I called this 2 hamburgers, right? The backup hamburger and the recovery hamburger. Now, as not approved vernacular, but the reality is trusted immutable backups, backup verification, ensure that what we have is recoverable, and the 3-2-1 rule. Those are the recipes from a protection side to prepare for that punch in the face. Over on the recovery, Veeam has high-speed recovery like nobody else in the market. Instant recovery at scale. This is something that's very, very critical to getting out of a problem quickly. The secure restore technology that I spoke about earlier, and orchestrated disaster recovery to let you and your stakeholders know that you can get out of a problem in the expected timeframes. I mean, just to put this in perspective, Scott, this is crazy. We have a tool that will automatically verify that you can recover from a disaster. And if you want to do it in 4 hours, it'll test it every day that you can do it in 4 hours. And it'll report on you the day it goes over, meaning I set everything up on day 1 and day 95, 10% data growth. Now I'm not fitting in that window. This is a wonderful world of technology that we live in today. Let's take it to the next level. So I just think that's awesome of what we live in. So I hope all of you have had this as a very, engaging bit here. We got a couple of links here. By the way, those bottom 2, the PC security channel and Virus Total, those are my 2 favorite places to go to learn about ransomware. I don't only want to talk about Veeam. I take in a lot from all of this other stuff, and we've got the 5 people that we're going to send some books out to. But Scott, thank you so much for joining me here today. Any closing thoughts on what we've discussed and what you've seen in the comments?
Yeah, one of the things we didn't talk about that's another commonality in all my victimizations, and this is kind of what I share with my friends and my family, and consider Veeam and everyone here, that if you do not use 2-factor authentication on every bit of remote access, you're going to have an incident. Because, according to a majority of my friends who are all working with all the major IR companies, majority of their stuff is account compromise. Account compromise. And how do we teach end users to do this? We make sure that today, if we're not doing this at home, we're not going to do it at work. Because I get brought into organizations that have a lot of smart people, very, very technical, all the best tools in place. And then I just ask them simple questions that aren't on regular assessments. Hey, do you have two-factor authentication on your Salesforce? And most of them go, I don't know, that's the sales department. I'm like, okay, what about your HR platform? Because now we're still seeing the theft of information that is showing up on the dark web on all of these commercially available platforms. So my whole situation is think about that. And also, as we talk about cybercrime, make sure you keep your kids and your parents safe. I talk about that in the book. And over here, what I'd like you to do, and I can't, connect with me on LinkedIn. And for anyone who connects with me today, I'm going to send you the best 2 chapters of my book, which is keeping your kids safe and keeping your family safe. Because, you have a ransomware attack, it impacts you, you're going to survive. But I can't tell you how often we're dealing with, so many of us are dealing with our kids. So many of us are dealing with our elderly parents. These are things as we look at cybercrime. And remember, I talked about nobody expects to be a victim. Bad guys steal your stuff, encrypt your stuff, not getting it back. Putting the bad guys in jail is very, very challenging. That makes people depressed. But the fourth truth to cybersecurity is a majority of the incidents that I dealt with could have easily been prevented. And when I wrote a book called The Secret to Cybersecurity, I didn't have a secret, but the secret to cybersecurity is you as an end user can empower yourself to reduce your chances across the board. And with that, Rick, I love what you guys are doing in the world, because you know what? No matter how many times you read the book, I mean, I can give away a prize. You can take me on a cruise. We can talk information security for 40 straight hours, and you still could become victimized. And at the end of the day, your last chance is making sure you have a good backup in place and making sure that your backup works.
Yeah.
And love to take some more questions and interact with the folks here. I mean, this is awesome.
Yeah, this is awesome. We did crack that 300 level. And, I want to kind of then pivot it around. We'll hold on this slide one more time here if you want these URLs. The Ransomware Assessment and Prevention Kit from Veeam, a very practical way that you can get started. Just assessing, we have a pretty good assessment tool from a backup perspective. Again, that secure backup and recovery is your last line of defense. And then the hardened repository. This is something that requires basically no additional Veeam cost. You can have an immutable copy in your hand just like that. Check those 2 out before we go off this slide. But the one thing I'll highlight to the practicing IT pros here today, this is the classic example, because the advice that Scott's dropping and I'm dropping, some of it might seem hard, some work, but classic example of the juice is worth the squeeze. This is work that is worth doing. So I know it might seem like a lot, but when everything's on the line, there's nothing more important than being prepared to get punched in the face like this. So thank you so much, Scott. And then as we wrap up this Trailblazer Talk, it's a series we've been doing here at Veeam. I just hope that everybody has found this information helpful. And I'm going to turn it back over to Scott B., the other Scott, the moderator of the event, for his prizes. And we'll go into some wrap-ups at that time.
All right, great. Yeah, man, fantastic, provocative, useful conversation, you guys. Unbelievable volume of questions and comments coming through. And just really nice job drinking from the fire hose there and, just taking those questions as they came. Scott, we're already connected on LinkedIn. I'd love to get those chapters that you're talking about. That'd be great.
Listen, at the end of the day, and my LinkedIn's ringing off the hook right now. Please take advantage. I mean, keep your kids safe, keep your parents safe. I mean, there's no backing up your kids. There's no backing up your parents. I mean, that's so important.
Absolutely. So as Rick mentioned, we do have one more prize to announce. Rick mentioned the book winners already. Our $50 gift card for best question also we pick after the event. But before we wrap up, we do have one more piece of business. It's that $300 Amazon gift card prize drawing just for attending. And the winner of that gift card is Ben Harry from Wisconsin. So congratulations to Ben. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of Actual Tech Media, I do want to thank Rick and Scott for just putting together again a really informative presentation and all your insights in the taking questions all throughout. I'd like to thank Veeam for making this event possible. And last but not least, I'd like to thank all of you for attending and again for all those questions. This concludes today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.